Right, so good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Philippa Doyle. I'm the head of the social care advisory team at Hempsons Solicitors. 25 years experience of working with primary and community care providers, do lots of work with social care providers, lots of quarter protection work and information governance work. But for my sins, over the last kind of 10 years or so, I've become a little bit of an expert in CQC. And as Richard said, this is the third session that we've done now by way of a webinar aimed at social care providers, focusing on the new CQC single assessment framework. So if you just want to advance through, Daryl, please. As Richard's already said, the focus today is very much going to be on staffing. So there are 4 quality statements that look in particular at different staffing elements. And what I want to focus on is getting you to understand exactly what CQC are looking for, and then how you can present your evidence in the best possible way to try and get maximum scores on each of those quality statements. There is a lot of detail in these slides. There's about 30 slides altogether. As Richard said, you will get a copy of the slides afterwards, and some of the detail I will skip over a little bit because we've got a lot to cover in sort of 45, 50 minutes. And as I've said on the slide as well, and as Richard said, if you want to go back and listen to either of the 2 earlier webinars, then recordings of those available as well. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please, Daryl. I just thought it would be useful to do a little bit of a where are we now. So the go live date for everybody has now long since passed. 6th of February was the date when everything changed for everybody around the country. So if CQC turned up this morning, if indeed they turn up in your service tomorrow, then they will be inspecting and assessing you against the new regime. They're calling it an assessment, not an inspection, and it's got 2 parts to it now as well. There's cross the threshold observations, which are a lot like the old style inspection with an individual or a team of people coming into your service. And then there's the paper-based analysis, which is about reviewing evidence. And evidence is even more important than it ever has been in terms of how CQC assess your services now. And you'll see as we talk through the quality statements and as you look at them all in more detail within your services, this is all about what evidence you've got within the service, how you can demonstrate and showcase to CQC how your service operates, how it meets the specific requirements of those individual quality statements. CQC are asking for PIRs in advance. And they do tell you to a certain degree what information they want you to provide. They tell you which quality statements they're inspecting you, assessing you against. And if they don't, then please do ask. And so the general view is it's likely more onerous for them than it is for you, because for you, it's business as usual. For them, they're grappling with new systems and new processes, which, as we've all heard and come to realise, aren't quite going to plan and how they would have expected. So if we can advance again, Daryl, I couldn't really do this webinar without saying something about all of the adverse publicity and everything that's been in the news over the last month or so around CQC. So I try to stay positive about everything. I do think that this new process is going to work. It's just got a lot of lumps and bumps in it at the moment. So I'm really pleased that they, as I say, not so new government and not so new leaders at CQC are grappling with the deficiencies in the system and taking steps to try and address them, because that's exactly what I tell every provider to do, that when you identify there's a problem in your system, don't try and run away from it or bury your head in the sand, face up to it, tackle it head on and say, right, this is what we're going to do to try and fix it, which is what we're starting to hear from CQC is what they're going to do to try and make this work. Richard and I had a brief chat before this webinar. We've both heard from different sources the single assessment framework is not going away. They are not going to go back to the old system. But what we do hope they will do is kind of work with the scoring system, work with the creation of the reports, so that we're not getting these very bland reports that seem to be AI generated, and that we do have the right people involved in assessing the information, putting all that together to produce some meaningful reports that properly reflect the service that you're delivering. So my focus for you is on helping you pick apart each of the quality and statements and ensure that you understand what CQC are looking for, and then that you can present the best quality evidence from your service to get the best possible score. Because what I've started saying to services is this is like being back at school. When you remember the teachers told you to read the question and make sure you answer the question, don't just write everything you know about a subject. CQC are exactly the same with these quality statements. Make sure you properly understand what each quality statement is saying, and then think about what evidence you've got to be able to, as I say, try and get those maximum scores for your service. So if we advance on to the next slide, please, Daryl. Today's focus is very much on staffing, and there are 4 quality statements that cover staffing that are based in the safe, caring and well-led domains, which is absolutely where you'd expect to see them. So if we look at the first one of those, please, Daryl, that's quality statement 6, safe and effective staffing. So the quality statement itself says, we make sure that there are enough qualified, skilled and experienced people who receive effective support, supervision and development and work together effectively to provide safe care that meets people's individual needs. And actually that wording is very, very similar to the wording of Regulation 18, staffing, in the fundamental standards of care about what you're being judged against and what you're being scored against. But CQC gives a little bit more detail. They tell us which evidence categories they're going to look at information from in relation to this quality statement. So they're going to look at people's experience. So the people that you support and their families, they're going to get feedback from them. And they'll get feedback from staff and leaders within the service. But they're also going to be looking at your processes. And whenever CQC say they're looking at processes, they mean that they're looking at documents, policies, procedures, hard evidence within your service. So they'll be looking at appraisals and supervision records for staff. They'll go through your recruitment records. They'll look at your staff vacancies and turnover rate. You know, have you got a stable staffing within your service? They'll look at your staffing levels and your skill mix records. Have you got a decent dependency tool so that you've got clarity over the complexity and the dependency of the people in your service, and that you can evidence to CQC by reference to that dependency tool how many people you've got on shift at any one time, but also what your business continuity plans are. If and when staff don't turn up for work on a morning, what do you plan? How do you backfill as quickly as possible to make sure that you've got sufficient people to care for the people that you support? And then they're also going to be looking at training, development and competency records as well. So you need to have all of those available within the service. So if we move on, please, Daryl. CQC then very helpfully tell us what the quality statement means. So it gives us a bit more of an understanding of what they're looking for. So there are six points there. They're looking for robust and safe recruitment practices to make sure that all of your staff, and that includes agency staff, any volunteers and workers that are within your service, have got suitable experience, they're competent and they're able to carry out their role. They're looking to see that your recruitment, your disciplinary, your capability processes are fair, that they're kept under review, to ensure that there are no disadvantages to people based on specific protected equality characteristics. And I do just want to highlight protected characteristics as well. It's something that CQC are very, very alive to at the moment, and it's something that you need to be alive to within your service, and that staff have an awareness of that phrase as well. CQC inspectors do sometimes ask staff, you know, what are you doing within your service to ensure that you're working fairly with people with protected characteristics, and sometimes staff aren't familiar with that terminology. So it's really important to make sure that that's terminology that people understand within the service and they know what that means. CQC are looking to see that there's appropriate staffing levels, appropriate skill mixes, as I say, to make sure that people have got those consistent, safe, good quality care that meets their needs. And they'll do that by looking at dependency tools, making sure those dependency tools are up to date based on the people that you support, and then looking at how many people you need to be able to safely meet those dependency requirements. They also want to see that staff are receiving appropriate support. So they're looking at the level of supervision you have in the service, your appraisals, and what support you've got to develop and improve services, and where people can improve themselves, whether they can maybe go on and get other qualifications, but that there's that level of consistency across the service that if you say everybody's going to have 12 supervisions a year, they actually have 12 supervisions a year. If you say everybody's going to have an appraisal once a year, that you have an appraisal once a year. If you fall down on any of those numbers, then you will find negative comments creeping into the report because you've set some standards that then you've not delivered against. But they also want to see as well that staff at all levels have got the opportunity to learn, that poor performance is being managed appropriately, that you don't get people victimised or picked on because standards might have slipped in some area. So if we can move on, please, Daryl. There's some subtopics in there that they want to look at as well. Very much a repeat of what I've just talked about. So that's safe recruitment, making sure that CQC checklist of everything that needs to be in a recruitment file is there, including those DBS requirements. Staffing levels and the skill mix are right, skills, qualifications are there, learning development and competency, support and supervision, performance management, and that covers volunteers and unpaid carers as well. So when you break it down and you see what the quality statement is talking about, there's a lot of information there that's available from CQC telling you what they are looking for. But what I then do, if we take it on to the next slide, please, Daryl, is I then take it back to the fundamental standards. So the fundamental standards of care are in the regulated activities regulations. Those are the standards below which care must not fall and that you have to deliver care against. And so Regulation 12 is the first one that jumps out at you around safe care and treatment. That's got a whole section in it around ensuring that the persons providing care or treatment have got the qualifications, skills and experience to do so safely. So you can see there where the quality statement links directly into the regulations in terms of what CQC are looking for. So they'll review some of your personnel or staff files. So you need to make sure that every staff file has got all the key information in it that CQC require for a new starter. That's going to be dead easy for anybody that you've recruited recently because we've had this checklist and so you know exactly what you're looking for. Where you're going to find gaps is where you've got somebody who's worked for the service for 20, 30 or 40 years, maybe came straight from school with no experience or references. And so where you've got those gaps in those people, it's making sure that you do a little risk assessment and that you put that within their staff file so that you are satisfied that this person that's been with you forever is actually the right person to be with you. And even though you haven't got, references from other services because they've never worked anywhere else, you're still satisfied that everything's okay for them to work for you. Do make sure that everybody's training is up to date. Do make sure that what you say is mandatory training, that you're actually delivering against. So if you say 100% of people are going to do this kind of training, you need to get 100% of your staff through that level of training. Otherwise, CQC will say that you are falling below those standards. If you're introducing something extra, something special, then think about how you're going to introduce that. Do I need the totality of my staff team to do that within the first year? Is there a much smaller cohort where it's essential for them but not for everybody else? Set your standards at the right level so that you know you can actually deliver against what you're going to promise. Don't overpromise and underachieve because that's where you're going to get caught out. The same goes for appraisals and supervisions. As I say, whatever standards you set, make sure that you deliver against those. Make sure you've got a policy that if staff are falling behind on that mandatory training, that you maybe give them one or two chances, but then they can't come on shift. and they can't support people anymore until that mandatory training is complete, so that you can evidence that you're satisfied about the competencies and the safety of your staff and your service. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Daryl. Regulation 18 staffing then mirrors an awful lot of that as well. Again, needing sufficient numbers. It's not for CQC to say what sufficient numbers is. That's for you to determine sufficient numbers. So even though staff will often complain and say, oh, we're overworked and underpaid, and they're always wanting me to do extra shifts, or they don't offer me enough shifts, what is absolutely key here is you being able to evidence that you've risk assessed the people that you support, you know what their requirements are, and you can evidence that you've got rotas, contingency planning, matrices that are absolutely clear on the number of staff that you need on shift, and that you've always got the right numbers there to be able to support people. If we just go on to the next slide, please, Daryl. I just referenced very briefly here Regulation 19, fit and proper persons. It's mainly applying to your registered manager, your nominated individual. If you're a company, then the directors within your company. But just as there are those Regulation 18 staffing requirements, there are specific requirements as well in terms of those senior personnel. And one thing that I would just flag on top of that is around checking visas and ensuring that international colleagues have got that right to work requirement within the organisation. That applies just as much to directors of organisations as it does to recently recruited overseas staff, or you might have somebody that moved here many years ago when we were still part of the EU. You do need to just make sure that you've got copies of people's passports on file that are international colleagues, to make sure that they've got that leave to remain, leave to work in the UK, because it is something sometimes that organisations can get a little bit caught out on. So it's a little bit of an easy win there, just to go around and make sure you've got all of that. Next slide, please, Daryl. So just a little bit of a conclusion, just in that one quality statement. This is about getting the basics right with staff. Do an audit of your staff files, have a checklist to make sure that you've got on file all of the information that CQC are looking for, and where you've got gaps in that information, perhaps for a member of staff that's been with you for a very long time, then do what you can to plug that gap, or write in a risk assessment about to ensure that you're happy with that person. Go through your training records, set your standards, make sure that they're at the right level, get everybody through that training. And the same with appraisal and supervision. You set your standards, you need to make sure that you get everybody through it. If you don't, you've only got yourselves to blame when CQC mark you down in relation to that. So it is, it's a little bit of a quick win, because there are things that should be really straightforward and that you should be able to deliver against. And if you've got members of staff who are constantly falling through the net, then you do have to start questioning whether that's somebody that you want to continue to work with your organisation. So that's one of the big quality statements in relation to staffing. We've got 3 more to go through as well. So if we go on to the next one, please, Daryl. The next one is then quality statement 19, and this is about workforce wellbeing and enablement. So the previous quality statement talked about the numbers of staff and making sure they've got the right training and competencies to be able to support people. But this is about how you support your staff. So the quality statement itself says we care about and we promote the wellbeing of our staff, and we support and we enable them to always deliver person-centred care. So the evidence categories CQC will be looking at here will be feedback from the staff themselves and from leaders within the service. But again, they're also going to be looking at your processes, so your systems, your policies, your procedures, and they'll look at to see what mechanisms there are to monitor and improve and promote staff safety and wellbeing. They'll look at your staff management policies, and they'll look at your sickness, vacancy and turnover rates potentially. So if we move on, Daryl. So there's lots of detail there about what that quality statement means and what CQC are looking for within your organisation. So they're looking to see that the people that you support are receiving safe, effective, and person-centred care because you as a provider are recognising and meeting the wellbeing needs of your staff. So you're not making people work 12-hour shifts without a break. You're able to demonstrate that you've got the necessary resources and facilities for safe working, such as regular breaks and rest areas where staff members can withdraw from the people that they support and have a little bit of time for themselves to recharge, to be able to carry on delivering the very important role that they're fulfilling. That the people that you're working with are benefiting from staff who've got regular opportunities to provide feedback, raise concerns, and suggest ways to improve the service or staff experiences. And if necessary, leaders are then also providing a timely and considered response. So one of the things that CQC are really focusing on at the moment is feedback, not just from people who use the service, not just from their families, but also from staff. They want to see and hear that you as a provider aren't just dictating to staff how the service is going to operate and how the business is going to run. The staff have got a real involvement in the running and the operation of the organisation. So they've got those regular opportunities to provide feedback, but they can also raise concerns without fear of reprisal as well. And they're wanting to say that people's experience of a service is driven by a culture that normalizes good well-being. So what they mean by that is that it's it's a nice place to work. We've got a great culture here. If somebody's got a problem, they can talk to us about it. We're actively listening to people. We're very inclusive. We're not judging anybody. We're having open conversations. Something goes wrong, somebody can come to us straight away, and we can have a conversation and try and resolve that. So staff are really enabled to do their job well, but also to be well in themselves, because they're not going home at the end of the day stressed or worried about their role or something that might have happened during the day, because they're able to talk to the team, talk to the service, talk to the provider. And that leads on to the next bullet point as well, that staff are supported if they're struggling at work. And so this has a positive impact on the care that they deliver to people, because they see that their employer cares about them, and so they are more able and more facilitated to care about the people that they're working with as well. It's that symbiotic relationship, because staff are so important in the service. They've got easy access to personalised support that recognises the diversity of a workforce with proactive and reactive measures. So if something goes wrong, there's support there to be able to assist somebody. But actually, there's also systems and processes in place to support somebody so that something doesn't need to go wrong. That, if they feel themselves having a little bit of a wobble, that they've got mental health support, or if they want additional training around something, that's available within the organisation as well. And above all, CQC want to see that the people that you're supporting are supported by staff who feel valued, both by the leaders of the organisation, but also by their colleagues as well. So they've got a sense of belonging, they feel able to contribute to decision making, able to contribute to the running of the organisation. It feels like a family approach where everybody's able to speak up. So if we can go on, Daryl. There's some subtopics in there as well, because CQC love a subtopic. So they're looking there at support and wellbeing. They're looking at the unpaid carers and volunteers that might work in your service, as well as the paid staff. There might be a piece of work that needs to be carried out for lone workers if you've got a number of staff doing an overnight shift in a service on their own. That obviously needs a little bit of work doing on it to make sure that those people feel valued and supported in just the same way when they are working on their own rather than part of a bigger team. Looking at those caseloads and workload, how people, whether they feel overstretched, whether they're trying to care for too many people at one time, and also really important, staff safety as well, including around sexual safety if there is an issue around lone working or how those systems and services operate depending on the people that you're supporting. I then look at picking those quality statements apart and look at how they link back to the regulations. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Daryl. when we're looking again at which fundamental standards are engaged, CQC have brought Regulation 9 into this, person-centred care. You need to know a person's care needs and their preferences to know the suitability of certain staff members to work with them. You know that people with a certain presentation are going to respond better to different categories of people. Everybody's got a different personality, everybody works in a different way, and some people's presentations, whether that's young people with behaviours that challenge, whether it's an older person with dementia, whether it's cultural or someone from a different minority group, might work better with a different one of your carers. So personality matching can be really important. You know, you can't support and enable somebody to properly understand their treatment choices and to make the best of their own life if there isn't a bond, if there isn't that really good working relationship with a person and carer. So it's about you knowing the care needs and the preferences of the people that you support under person-centred care, to know the suitability of certain staff members to work with them to get the best out of each other. It leads into Regulation 12 that we've already talked about as well, where you need to ensure that the people providing care and treatment have got qualifications, competence, skills and experience to do so safely. And the carers are at the heart of delivering safe care and treatment. So you've got to know that the people who are doing the caring feel cared for themselves. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to deliver the best possible care and support to the people within your service. Moving on to the next slide, please, Daryl. Regulation 17 and Regulation 18 are always going to be important as well. So Regulation 17 is all about good governance. That's the well-led section of a CQC report, and it's looking at policies and procedures. You always need to assess, monitor, and improve the quality and safety of the services that you're providing, making sure you've got those systems and processes in place, making sure that you're auditing. Systems and processes includes your HR policies, your HR procedures, and all the support and wellbeing arrangements that services are putting in place to make sure that your staff feel valued and that they've got that additional support and guidance. As I've said on the slide under Regulation 18, support has become a really important word. When I did this training previously, I would kind of gloss over the word support and I'd focus on training and professional development and supervision and appraisal. But this whole quality statement is very much around what support is offered to staff over and above standard supervisions and appraisals. Some services report that supervisions can end up being the same conversation month in and month out. CQC are looking for something above and beyond that, that really shows how people within your service, how your staff, how your workers are valued. And it's very much cultural. So it'll come out to a certain degree through policies and procedures. But when CQC speak to staff, they'll really get that understanding of whether staff know what wellbeing support is on offer to them. Not just that, oh, well, we've got this thing on the intranet that we can click on if we want to, but nobody ever looks at it. It's very much about wanting to know what the culture of the organisation, whether they feel the providers got their back. If something did go wrong, could they actually go and talk to the registered manager about it really easily and know that the service would help support them through that difficult time, rather than just kind of being left worrying about it overnight. So if we go on to the next slide in this section, please, Daryl. Just to bring everything together in relation to this quality statement, as I've said, CQC are placing greater emphasis on staff receiving support than ever before. They're very, very mindful of the ever-increasing mental health challenges that we have with supporting staff, particularly post-COVID. So whilst you need to show via policies and procedures and your intranet what staff wellbeing support there is, it also needs to be something that staff know about, that they access, that they utilise, that it's familiar to them. And so it does feel like genuine support that they can talk to CQC about. It's not just a mental health helpline that, there's a number on a poster on the wall, but nobody ever rings it or nobody ever accesses it. So this is very much a focus on your staff, not so much on the people that you support, but just as important a part of your business and the very important job that you do is making sure that your staff have got that support, that your staff are in the right place, because that's what's going to keep them within the organisation and enable them to deliver the high quality care that the people in your care, quite rightly deserve. So if we move on to the next quality statement, please, Daryl. This is very much an NHS-focused quality statement, but it does reach through into social care, and it's important as well. So it's Quality Statement 29, which is freedom to speak up. And I think we have got some NHS people on the webinar today, and they will be quite familiar with the concept of having a freedom to speak up guardian within the organisation. And the quality statement itself is that we create a positive culture where people feel that their voice will be heard. So we don't just have to do that through a freedom to speak up guardian. That's just about an organisation where staff feel able to, put their hand up and say, I don't like this, I don't agree with this, I think we could be doing this in a different way. So the evidence categories CQC will look at will be feedback from staff themselves and from leaders, but they'll also look at your processes as well. They'll look at how do you seek and respond to staff feedback that I've already mentioned, but also they'll look at what whistleblowing arrangements you've got within your organisation and whether you've got any whistleblowing records as well of people raising concerns and how those have been handled within the organisation. If we move on, please, Daryl. So what CQC are looking for in this quality statement is they're looking to see that staff and leaders are acting with openness, honesty and transparency, that they're actively promoting staff empowerment to drive improvement. So they're looking for those concerns, that feedback to be raised. They're looking to see that staff are confident that their voices will be heard, and they're happy to say something because they know that they'll be listened to. They won't just be ignored and swept to one side. And again, they're looking for the culture of the organisation. They're looking again to see that there's a culture of staff being able to speak up, to actively raise concerns, and that they're supported to do that. They're not going to be shot down. They're not going to have any kind of fear of reprisal. And that where concerns are raised, those are investigated sensitively, confidently, confidentially, and that lessons are learned, lessons are shared and acted on, and the organisation changes as a result of those issues, so that when something does go wrong, people receive a sincere and a timely apology, and they're being told what's going to be undertaken so that we don't have a recurrence of that same issue. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Daryl. You've got your little subtopics there again as well, that speaking up culture, freedom to speak up guardian that we see in the NHS, whistleblowing, and that we don't have any closed cultures. We do see that sometimes where you've got very small services with very small numbers of staff supporting people, that they become such a tight-knit, small little community of 3, 4, 5, 6 people that it starts to become very paternalistic. And it can lose sight of the bigger organisation. So it's really important where you've got those very, very small services that there is that level of oversight, and it doesn't all get, kind of too incestuous and too bound up in itself, and you don't end up with that closed culture type situation. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Daryl, and look again at which fundamental standards are engaged. Regulation 10, dignity and respect, comes in here. We need to ensure that we are supporting people's autonomy, independence and involvement in the community in terms of the people that we support. And we're also having regard to those protected characteristics as well. So that if people want to present in a different way, or anybody with disabilities, we need to be very mindful of how we still support them, so that they are treated with dignity and respect in the same way that we would want anybody else to. Regulation 12 kicks in, as it often does, safe care and treatment. We need to be able to demonstrate that we're assessing risks and we're doing all that's practicable to mitigate risks. And those are business risks as well as individual risks. So looking at those business continuity plans, we're looking at how we're demonstrating ongoing improvement. And we can demonstrate ongoing improvement by having that active involvement from staff within the service, listening to what they've got to say, constantly driving change, constantly driving improvement. excuse me, that looks at those constant risks that we're assessing, and we're doing what we can to mitigate those risks and drive the organisation forwards. On to the next slide, please. Good governance and person-centred care comes in here as well. Policies and procedures, inviting feedback, demonstrating that ongoing improvement. They're all things that you'll see just as we've been talking in this session. There are multiple occasions where the same information might be relevant to answer different quality statements, but in a slightly different way. Collaborative care planning, supporting and enabling people under person-centred care is going to feed in as well to that freedom to speak up process of staff being able to say, well, actually, I think this would work best for this person. I want to be involved in kind of the organic development of their kind of care planning process and what they want to do and what their preferences are. And we think that these right people will work together as part of that process. So if we just advance forward again, please, Daryl, bring everything together there. As I said, freedom to speak up formally is an NHS requirement, but the principles are really useful to utilise across the board in other services. It's very much about culture. It's not something that's particularly easy to demonstrate through paperwork, but if you've got the documentation in place with those systems and processes in place to engage people to speak up, then it becomes a culture. And it's not just about whistleblowing. People shouldn't just think that freedom to speak up is about putting your hand up and saying something when you think that something's going wrong. It's about encouraging people to speak up about anything. So it can and should be used in a really positive way to secure suggestions, secure all kinds of feedback about, different ways that the organisation could be run. And if a service is in a position to show that staff do speak up, that they do come to management with concerns and ideas, and that management are implementing those, that's going to go a really long way in terms of demonstrating that evidence and really showcasing your service to CQC to try and score maximum points on this particular quality statement. So just on to the next slide, the final one that I just want to highlight for you in this section where we focused on staffing is Quality Statement 30. And this is about workforce equality, diversity and inclusion. And the quality statement itself says that we value diversity in our workforce. We work towards an inclusive and fair culture by improving equality and equity for people who work for us. So we've got our evidence categories again that CQC are looking for. So that's going to be feedback from staff and from leaders within the organisation. And then the processes, again, is going to be very much a focus on mechanisms for seeking and responding to staff feedback. So that's been a bit of a theme on all of these quality statements that we've looked at. They're going to look at your equality and diversity and inclusion policies and training. They'll look at what flexible working arrangements you've got. What reasonable adjustments do you make for staff? What use of assisted technology might there be within the service? They'll look at whether there are records of where there's been particular incidents of violence towards staff or abuse towards staff and what the organisation is doing about that. And they'll look at workforce or equality and diversity strategies and associated objectives and action plans. Again, there's a lot in here that's very focused on the NHS, but lots of what's been implemented within the NHS can be extrapolated and used for good with social care providers, particularly with some of the much bigger services. You should really be focusing on having equality and diversity policies. And even in the smaller services, with such a diverse population now, with people from all over the world working for us, that it's really important that we do treat everybody fairly, and we can demonstrate that we're treating everybody fairly as well. So if you could just move forward onto the next slide for me, please, Daryl. Lots of really dense text in here, and I think some of that is because it's been repeated that something went a little bit awry with the formatting on here. But certainly the detail in that is that leaders are looking to take action to continually improve the culture of the organisation. So it's that word culture again, not things that we can necessarily show very much on paper, but it's about how people feel and whether staff members feel supported and welcome, particularly if they're from a different country. Looking at the culture of the organisation in the context of equality, diversity and inclusion, that leaders are taking action if there are any disparities in staff experiences, particularly around those protected characteristics or people from marginalised groups, that all interventions are monitored so that we can evaluate that impact and improve that awareness and improve the support that we give to people from different backgrounds. We take steps to remove bias from practice so that we've got that equality of opportunity and experience. We don't have a situation where, you know, the only person that's ever going to get to be registered manager, you know, is a white middle class, you know, ex-nurse who's worked her way up through the organisation. That there's scope for, you know, anybody across the organisation to have that training, have that development, get additional qualifications and work their way up through the organisation. We're checking on that accountability. We've got an ongoing review of policies and procedures so we don't get any kind of institutional discrimination or bias within the organisation if we're of a size where that might be relevant. We're looking at preventing and addressing bullying and harassment. We're making reasonable adjustments to support disabled staff to carry out roles. We're taking active steps to ensure that staff and leaders are representative of the population of people using the service. We've got effective and proactive ways of engaging with and involving staff, focusing on hearing voices of people with protected characteristics, anybody that might feel otherwise excluded or marginalised or not listened to. That, you know, staff are empowered, they're confident, they know that their ideas are going to result in change. So again, you know, very, very similar comments and very similar themes from that last Freedom to Speak Up quality statement as well, that there's information that you can use on a number of different levels. The same information might be useful to answer different quality statements. If we go on to the next slide, please, Daryl. Lots of subtopics there. Fair and equitable treatment of staff, human rights, the well-being of the workforce, if there's any kind of gender pay gap, if there's any kind of workforce diversity, what flexible working arrangements might you have within the organisation. And then anyone on this call who's from an NHS background might be familiar with the workforce race equality standards and the workforce disability equality standards as well, that are really useful to read into and to understand and work towards for those in the social care sphere as well. So how do those link to the fundamental standards of care, to the regulations? Well, if we move on to the next slide, please, Daryl. Fundamental standards there, which ones are engaged? So Regulation 17, good governance, obviously, policies, procedures, feedback, demonstrating that ongoing improvement in terms of how you're engaging with staff. Regulation 18, staffing itself, highlighted that word support again. It's about having that appropriate support for the organisation, the training, the professional development, the supervision and the appraisal. All of that is really pulled apart in these quality statements and really delved into in detail to see where the regulations fit with the quality statements and the information that CQC are looking for. So just on to the next slide again, Daryl. Just to bring everything together for a conclusion, just in that one quality statement, it's about staff equality and diversity. You should have an equality and diversity policy, and at a minimum, I'd expect to see you having some flexible working arrangements. I expect that the vast majority of staff working within social care are already used to those flexible working arrangements anyway. Lots of carers are working on shift patterns. They've got 2 jobs across different services, so they're used to those flexible arrangements, and employers are used to those flexible arrangements as well. Equality and diversity is something that the NHS are really driving through. It's a very big project that's going on across the NHS, but it can absolutely be tracked through into social care to assist in demonstrating that really inclusive work environment, particularly where we've got so many overseas workers working within different social care providers, being a really proactive organisation and being really hot on equality and diversity and your policies and procedures and using those NHS standards, but tracking them through into your organisation is going to sit really well in terms of supporting people and then feeling supported and having the right culture within the organisation, but also ticking those boxes and getting those CQC standards as well. Monitoring and assessing incidents towards staff is also really important, particularly where that might be coming from the people that you support by virtue of their presentation. Obviously, staff wellbeing is very important, and you need to make sure that staff aren't repeatedly being, bitten or hit by the people that you support, but that does happen. It's really, really important that you're adjusting people's PBS plans or providing additional support to staff who are working in those difficult packages, that you've got that extra training, you've got that extra support being offered to people who are working with people that you support that might have those more complex behavioural presentations. A really good service is going to be able to show that training, show those risk assessments, show that level of awareness prior to working with somebody with those complex behaviours. But if you can wrap that together with excellent reporting of incidents and analysis and debriefs, wraparound support for staff, debriefing support for staff, additional training and awareness and development for them, then that's really going to shine through in terms of that culture of the organisation that's going to show you in a really good light when CQC are assessing your service. So if we can move on to what I think might be the final slide. Staff are your biggest asset. You know that. And their health and well-being is just as important as the people that you support. Staffing is a huge issue across social care providers and across the NHS. And we know how easy it is for staff to walk away from one service and go and get a job somewhere else, whether that's with another provider or with, supermarket or Amazon or wherever else. So it's really, really important to treat your staff really well, because you treat them well, they're going to respond to you. They're going to care for people well. They're going to speak well to CQC. You're going to retain them within your service. And they're also going to help you in showcasing the service to CQC as well, and really demonstrating and driving home to CQC what a great service that you're delivering. And that's going to result in better scoring all round. So that's my final overall conclusion. Final slides in the pack are just to give you my details, to just remind you all that you are entitled to half an hour's worth of free advice through Hempsons Social Care Advice Line. And I don't think Richard would mind me giving a little bit of a plug of a joint publication that Hempsons and Care England are putting together. The analysis that I've done today around those 4 quality statements on staffing, which has been, very much a whistle-stop tour, I've done that for all of the quality statements. And we've got a publication that we hope to launch in the very near future that gives you that detail and that analysis of each of those 34 quality statements. So if you are interested in hearing more about that, having some direct training from me in person that goes through all of that in a lot more detail with much more opportunity for discussion and questions, then please do get in touch with Richard or myself and we can get that sorted for you. But I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a breath because I can feel my throat going. Have we got any questions, Richard? Anything that anybody would like to ask about?
I don't have any questions that come in the chat yet, Philippa, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was an incredibly thorough walkthrough, and a lot of those themes come through multiple times. And I think the big one I pick up is the culture. That's a big one from my perspective, is culture. And I think obviously when the inspectors come in, the inspectors are asking staff questions. How should we prepare our staff for the inspectors coming and asking those questions to get the best sort of feeling of our culture across as care providers?
It's about ensuring that the staff know what's available for them within the organisation, and that they do genuinely feel supported, that you've got a register manager with an open door, that they're not coming in just doing a job and going home at the end of the day, like you might do if you were, sitting behind the tills in Tesco's. This is actually a valued career. And for something to feel like a career, the organisation's got to buy into you as a person as well. You're not a commodity. You're not a tin of beans. You're an important part of that organisation because you're delivering really important care to very vulnerable individuals. So staff need to understand what questions CQC might be asking them. I'm not suggesting that staff should be coached on what to say, but there are some key buzzwords that they need to have an awareness of. If you do one thing from this session, it's make sure that your staff have heard of the terminology protected characteristics and that they know what protected characteristics are. They do know what they are because they know not to discriminate against somebody because of their age or their sex or their disability or, whether you're Richard one day or you're Doris tomorrow and you wear a dress, that you're still the same person who deserves to be treated in exactly the same way. So staff know all of that. They just might not know the terminology protected characteristics. And sometimes somebody can ask a bit of a sneaky question and say, well, tell me what your service does to support people with protected characteristics. And the staff member might think, well, I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm just going to say, well, we don't do that. Whereas actually you do that. You do lots of work within the organisation, but the staff member feels under pressure because of the question that's been asked.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much. There's I haven't had any questions come in yet, but there's probably just another one I was going to ask is there's some great employee assistance programs out there as well. Do you think they're helpful for supporting staff and staff wellbeing?
They are absolutely helpful as long as staff don't just see them as a poster on the wall.
Yeah.
It needs to be something that people have got direct experience of using, and that again, there's that culture within the organisation of people, really being able to say, oh, do you know what? I accessed that counselling helpline because I was having a really bad day, and I found it really helpful, and to feel comfortable to say to a colleague, look, we can go to the pub and have a pint and I'll listen to what you're talking about, but you should really pick the phone up to one of these experts because they'll really be able to break stuff down and take you through the next level. And so it's not just a poster on a wall or a phone number that people can access, that people genuinely do use the service and are able to talk about the support that they can get from it.
Fabulous, thank you. And I did just drop a link to a report in that we did recently. We launched on the 11th of September, which is around EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion in the workforce. So if anyone is reviewing their policy or rewriting their policy, that's a great document to refer to. It's got great support in there about for a workforce that's 81% generally female, 26% from ethnic diverse backgrounds. And there's some great support in there for things like the menopause and what have you as well, which are all incredibly important subjects and topics to include in inclusion policies as well. So I think, Philippa, we haven't had any questions come in, so I'll just quickly check the email one more time. It's just a thank you so much for this being the third of the fourth. It's been absolutely amazing again. Great attendance right the way through, and I know that we'll get the recording of this out to everybody after the event, and a copy of the slides as well. We'll be able to do that later on today, hopefully. But just a big thank you, and we'll see you all in December for the fourth one. We'll make sure you're all sent invitations for that one as well. And if you've got any feedback you'd like to send to me personally, please do so. My email is in the chat. Oh, actually, Philippa, before you do go, I have got one question that might have just come in. Nope, that's it. No, just telling me the chat's closed, but there you go. Thank you very much for your time. Take care, Philippa. I'll end the call there. I'll just stop recording.